Hi everyone, welcome to one of my short tutorials. Now this piece is for people who are just beginners with pastel and want to try and give it a go with a limited palette and see how things go. Now what I'm going to do is talk you through working from this picture here. Now I've chosen this picture deliberately because obviously it's a lovely dramatic scene of the Llyn Peninsula with a lovely stormy dark cloud over it. Of course that's summer in Wales a few years back. Now the reason I've chosen this though is because it's got a very limited palette. It's nice and dramatic and it's got some interesting things to work with, but it's not too complicated in terms of the range of colours used. So if you're a beginner with pastels, I would definitely suggest not going for a full-blown dramatic sunset first of all, but starting to learn to know the medium and how it works by choosing something like this, where you can be confident about how the pastel moves and how the layers build up before you then work on adding a lot of interesting colours. Now, as you can see for the palette here, what I've done is I've put together a range of different shades of grey. So I've got 3 different shades of grey here. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use yet until I go on here, and it's hard to tell sometimes with greys whether you've got a brown grey or a blue grey, but I've got 3 different greys out so I can then work with those. I've got a very dark colour out here, it's almost black but it's like a very much a blue black. I've also picked out a purple. Now my reason for picking a purple out to go with this isn't because I can see purple in here. I can't see purple in here, you'll be glad to hear, you haven't missed something. But it's because there's lots of yellow down here. Now when you're doing a piece that's got things like a yellowy area down towards the bottom of the sky, it's quite nice to include some purple up with your clouds or some lilac in this area here, because yellow and purple are opposite on the colour wheel, and that'll give you a nice strong vibrant picture and it'll give it a nice complementary colour. So a little bit of purple with those dark clouds just lift the picture a little bit. And also you want to be cautious about using lots of blue shades when it comes to combining blue down to yellow, because for obvious reasons blue and yellow are going to make green, so the purple will help with that as well. And I might need to use a lilac later on, so I'll get the lilac out now just to make sure I can work from these colours into this colour without getting a green across this area here where the light gets brighter. And I've also then got 3 paler shades here. One's very much that sort of yellowy colour that you can see over here. Now, I haven't gone for a bright yellow because it's quite a muddy yellow colour, so I've gone for this kind of creamy yellow. Then a much paler cream. This is actually, it is yellowy, but it's very lightly yellow, just a tiny hint in there. Plus more of a grey blue colour. This is a very pale greyish tone, plus of course my white. Now as you can see then, it's a very limited palette. There are, quite a few pastels here, but there's not a massive amount in terms of the range of colours. So even if you haven't got a lot of pastels in your collection, hope to be able to gather together a few of these colours and be able to work with them. Even if you have just 3 shades in this area here, like a dark, a middle and a paler, you'd be able to get away with it, plus a purple perhaps. So you could in a way manage to narrow it down a bit just to a few. So you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. So you could get away with doing less than 10 colours if you had problems with, collecting the colours together. Right, so limited palette is the key then. And then organise your palette. So get it out, lay out the colours like this and work out whether you think you've got the right range. And if you don't see a colour in there and think, well, it's, there's not a particular colour to go for, deliberately choose a colour like purple that's going to balance the yellow or whatever else you're using. So if it's a stormy grey cloud, even in a grey cloud, you need to add a hint of colour in there, like a blue or something, to give it a sense of richness. Otherwise it'll just be very flat. Now, first things first then. So what I'm going to do is start off with that purple. Now you hold the pastel end to end like that, so you've got it in your fingers and you're just sweeping across the surface with the flat of the pastel, so you don't use the tip of the pastel at this stage. Now I'm putting the purple across here where the dark part of the cloud goes. Now if you're just starting out with art in general and you feel uncomfortable and worried about things in terms of working out where your darks and lights are going to go, what you could do is use like one of the mid colours and do a quick sketch for where things are, just so you've got a vague guideline. just so you know where things are going to go. Dark cloud, paler cloud, mountains, and so on. But there's no point in drawing anything very particularly detailed about it, because what will happen is you'll end up with that just getting covered over straight away by the pastels. Next I'm going to put on is this more dark colour here. Now this dark colour is pretty much the colour you can see here. Okay, now the reason I put the purple on first is I want to get a little tint of purple coming through. So your idea of doing pastels is not that you find in your collection the exact same colour that you see on the surface. That's not how I work with pastels anyway. I like to mix my colours to make them really rich. So you might well find the right colour, but you need to add other colour in there a little bit, just to give it a hint of something else. So I'm putting this lovely dark stormy grey blue on there, on top of my purple, so you're layering up straight away. Now I'm going to go for more of that mid grey and start putting that across through here. Again, using the flat of the pastel, just dragging it over, and again I'm layering straight away. I'm not worried about putting some of that through the darker areas, that's fine. And I'm also going to put it into this paler area here, and let it just cut through that way and along down towards here. Now, as you can see here, I'm using the pastel in that direction because on the picture the cloud is kind of flowing that way. So you use the mark making your pastel to link to the direction of the clouds as well. Now I'm going to put a little bit of this bluish tone on here and just give my clouds a slightly different hint. So that's very much a turquoisey tone through there. I'm putting the odd dab through, again using the side of the brush, just a dab of it here and there. So when it mixes, you're going to get a combination of that with the purple. Now I'm going to go very dark. So this is the darkest colour that I've got virtually in my collection. Now, when you put a dark colour on, it can spread a great deal. So I'm going to put a bit on, but I'm going to dab at it. So you probably hear me making that dabbing motion with it. So rather than putting a great big block of it whooshed right the way across, I'm just adding a bit. And that will help when you mix, because it will be not too dominant, but also you'll then get a slightly patchy effect, which is what you want, because clouds are slightly patchy and not necessarily consistent with colour all the way across. Now I'm going back in with that stronger grey that is almost exactly the right colour for those clouds, and I'm going to put in dabs of that on there. So again, it's all overlapping and overlayering. A little hint of that coming down through here, so spreading out a bit from the edge. Don't worry about covering over where your pale area is with anything at this stage. Obviously you don't want to get very, very dark across it, because that would be awkward to get rid of, but it's not a disaster if it does happen by accident. And I'm going to go back in with my purple now, and just add a bit more purple through there, so when I mix it my purple comes back through a little bit. Right, now as you can see on here, we've got areas where there's still quite a lot of paper showing through, and there's areas where it's thicker and areas where it's a bit empty. So before we begin mixing, I want to go back and fill up those areas. I'm going to get my other grey here, and this is much more of a brownish grey. Now the minute I put it on there, I could see the difference. I hope you can see the difference too between here and here's a blue grey here and a brown grey here. Now I don't want to use too much of this brown grey, because it won't work well with this kind of blue, because brown grey's got more yellowy tones in it. So if you put it with this bluish colour, we're going to get a bit of green, slightly greenish effect, which you don't really want. But I want to use it a little bit, because when it comes to the mountains down here, I'm going to use it more down here for this area, and it'll work well against that yellowy tone down here. Now as you can see, I'm just putting a quick sketch of the mountains across there. Now as you can see, I haven't put any yellows on here yet. I'm not going to. We'll do that later on. We'll come back to that, but for now we're just sticking with building up the sky greys. So though you don't have to plan with pastels as much as you do with things like watercolours, because you know with watercolours you have to do a great deal of technical planning out, and if you get things in the wrong order it can be a disaster. With pastels it's not quite the same case, but you do have to think about your mixing. Now I'm going to be doing a lot of blending here, I don't want to add yellow at this point, because if I add yellow right now and it gets itself up into here, it'll end up with it being contaminating the blues and stuff. But I do want some pale down here, so I'm going to put this paler grey on here. It is not white. Okay, it looks very bright, but it isn't. And I'm going to put that pale through the bottom of the sky near the mountain as well. And there's no dash of light in the sky, so I'm going to put a little dash here and there. Again, just dabbing at it. Now, I've done my mark making diagonally all the way across. I'm not saying that's how you should always work. It's simply what applies to this sky here. So in the next piece you do, it doesn't mean you do the whole thing at that angle. It's just what I'm doing here. You would try and switch around. And as we get to the next stage, I will switch around more, but don't think that you must always work at a funny angle. It's not the case. It's just what's appropriate here. Right, okay, so when do you know that it's ready to blend? Well, there's a couple of different things. Now, the first one, you can just say, well, try it and see. Try blending a bit, and nothing happens, it's not ready to blend, okay? But it might be that you can also see when it's ready to blend, because on some pieces, like this one here, what happens is, when there's not much pastel on the surface, you will still see the speckly mark from the paper. When it's ready to blend, the pastel you've just put on like smears across the surface, and it just sort of leaves a dragging mark, and then it's got enough on the surface and it's starting to blend as you use the pastel. So that sort of thing can help you decide, but it's just a question of trial and error really. Now, blending, I'm just using one finger because it's not a big piece, but if it was a bigger piece I'd probably use the palm of my hand here, or 3-4 fingers together, but this is just a small piece to start with. So this piece is probably about 20 by 20 centimetres. Now, we're working on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. Now, although I'll let you know that sort of thing when I email you the information, I probably should have mentioned it in the video a bit earlier, but nonetheless, here we go. Clairefontaine pastel matte. Now, the joy of this paper is that it lets you build up lots and lots of layers on it. It's got a very strong tooth, and when you first put the pastel on the surface, if you look at my mountain bit down the bottom of here and rub it in, not much happens. Okay, it's very dry feeling, which is a bizarre thing to say about pastel paper, but it does feel dry. You feel sticky and stiff. But once you've got 3 or 4 layers on, suddenly it wants to blend. So you might find that your first few layers and your first rubbing in do feel quite hard work, and it shouldn't feel really, really hard work. If it feels too much and nothing much is happening, then just repeat your colours again. You haven't got to suddenly find new colours to add, you just repeat the same colours again and add another layer basically. So what I'm doing here is just blending in using circular motions, and I'm blending fairly firmly. Now I'm also doing it in quite a controlled way. I'm not going like a big blend right the way around like that. I'm just blending across the dark clouds initially. So the darkest areas are being blended first. And I'm being careful not to push my dark too far into this light area here, or into other light areas, because you can make the whole thing very muddy. So though I'm blending quite firmly, I'm keeping in a small confined area each time. Don't over blend, because what you'll end up with is, rather than having a combination of nice colours all mixing together, what you'll end up with is one big modge of just one colour, one mid-grey, and that's all you've got. And give your hands a quick wipe, and then blend the paler tones. And I'm letting that interact with the dark around it. So I'm pulling the dark a little bit into that light area, just going around and pulling it slightly in. Okay, and that's just to tone it down slightly until it mixes together. And again, I'm pushing it just along there. I'm not taking it too far into my dark, not letting it overwhelm it. And take it right off the edge of the paper. Okay, don't leave anything odd looking at the edges. Now clean your fingers a little bit again. Now I'm going to start looking at this pale area here. As you can see, look how far that pale suddenly spreads into there. Now also, I've done circular movements here because of the stormy cloud. Now I work diagonally with my mark making of the pastel across the way. circular movements over it. So that kind of balances that out, so it's not looking too much going that way. But when it comes to this area here, where it's got these streaks of colour cutting into it, it's quite linear looking, I will change my rubbing and just push that through there. And be careful though, because if you go too far into the dark and pull it through, you'll get a long streak of dark coming into your white. Quite effective actually, you want that sometimes, so you can control that and go, right, I'm going to take that bit of dark there and push it across. So you can then very firmly pull that pastel through and it will take that dark streak right the way over. But some areas you want to keep it fairly clean, so just be cautious of that and be aware the pastel will move. But I'm letting it move down through here and pulling that into that area there. So pulling that dark down that way. I'm also going to let it mix more through here. So I'm doing a circular movement and taking that dark from the cloud above into that area below. Right, and then a quick blend over my mountainous area here. I need to put a bit more colour on that. So a bit of the blue grey mixed with that brown grey. Now I'm really not worrying about where the edge is exactly, because that will come later. Okay, so that is then step one completed. So just to briefly recap, the first thing to do is organise your palette and give yourself a nice range of colours if possible. If it's not possible, then go for at least a set of 3 for each area. So go for a dark, a mid and a light for each area. So if you really haven't got a purple, for example, then you could get away with just a dark, a mid, a light for that area, then a set of 3 pales for the other area, and then a bit of yellow and cream and so on. Okay, so just do what you can with the palette you've got, but if possible add a little hint of something like purple in with the dark, because that will give it a nice richness which will then link to the yellow on here. And things like the brown grey are quite nice because again it ties with the yellow and it makes it not too much just blue then yellow then purple and so on. Okay, so first thing was organise your palette. Next thing was using the side of the pastel at all times. Now, one thing I failed to mention earlier on, which I should have done, apologise for this, but if you've got a new set of pastels and they're this big, for example, yeah, with the paper on, or it's a new set of larger other brand pastels, this is too big for your work, okay? It's a lovely bit of pastel, but you need to actually be quite bold, and it feels sacrilegious, I know, but actually snap it and then detach it from the paper. You want something that's about the size of a half stick. Now some inscribes come as half stick size, which is great, some unisons do too, but if it comes, anything you've got comes as a big pastel stick, it's too large, you need to be half a stick size, and that's the size you need to work with. So you use the side of the pastel and you build your layers up. So you add 2 or 3 shades in each area. So we've got at least 3 shades in the dark areas and a couple of shades in the pale area, a couple of shades in the very pale area. So each time you're using a range, so not just one colour in each bed. You then blend using different sort of movements, circular movement. I use mark making going diagonally, build those layers up, and then I rubbed in using a circular movement, but I kept my movement linear when it came to the edge of the cloud. And you make sure you can rub in each area separately and control how they blend together. Right, so that's step 1 over, and then we'll talk about in the next step how to do more detail on top and control some of the edge of the cloud and get the little details on there.